Hi there, and welcome along. The first review to be done inside during the 2024 rose review season. Unfortunately, the weather here in the UK has really turned quite horrible over the last few days. The rose up for you today was launched and introduced by David Austin Roses in 1993 and is classified as a short climber. I would also suggest if you wanted to grow this one, you could grow this one as a large informal shrub. Just give it an obelisk or a post or a pillar, something you can tie its canes into just to give it some support. The rose in question is called St. Swithun and is here, absolutely sopping wet. These few blooms are still filling the air with fragrance here in my dining room. As I say, launched in 1993, this one is suitable for growing in full sun only. This is one of the few climbers that's going to need direct sunshine all day, just as much light as you can possibly give it. I don't often recommend this with climbing roses, but because this one is actually fairly small, only reaching around 8 to 10 feet, it is more than possible for you to grow this one in a really large container, as long as the container is large enough. So if this is ranked along the same lines as Strawberry Hill, which is one of the other short climbers I recommend for growing in a pot, this one is more than manageable. However, because you're growing it in full sun, you are going to have to really be careful of your watering and your feeding regime. I say reaching around 8 to 10 feet, you can also grow it as a informal shrub or a short climber, give it an obelisk, a post, a pillar, something informal just to tie it into. This is not one of the climbers that's going to be really fussy about how you actually train it. So if you plant it against a wall, for instance, this one is still going to flower really well if you actually just fan train it out like you would do a fruit tree. This one doesn't have to have the canes brought down into a horizontal position, much like you would have to do with Gertrude Jekyll to actually make it flower heavily. These flowers are actually grown on something that is very, very small. It's only about 4.5 feet high so far and pretty much being grown as a shrub rose and absolutely covered in these beautiful flowers. The petal count is really high on this one, meaning that it unfortunately does get susceptible to some really inclement weather. So if you are somewhere particularly wet, you might want to tuck this out of any prevailing winds just to make sure that the flowers have the ability to open in inclement weather. It packs a really decent 130 petals in per flower and is hardy in growing zones 4 to 11. So it's really, really useful for growing in colder areas and also warmer climates than we are here in the UK. Foliage wise, this one has very, very large foliage indeed. You can see, look at the size of this one here. Foliage only really seen on plants like Donahue, recently added to the collection. Very, very wide. You can see up against my large hands there. They must be measuring at least 2.5 on to 3 inches across in diameter. Deeply serrated on the outer edges, they have this really lovely light grey steel coloured to them, which reflects the light beautifully. You can see in the light here, it's actually reflecting the light quite beautifully, but in almost quite a matte sheen, which is quite unusual. The plant itself has relatively few thorns, so it makes it quite useful for planting in high traffic areas, maybe by a front door or around a window, or if you have small children or pets that use the garden. There is a small amount of barbing to the leaf axil, but actually the plant itself doesn't have very many thorns at all. For the inexperienced gardener that is interested in growing climbing roses and are unsure of how to train a plant, St. Swithun is actually really easy to train, I say, because it's not overly fussy about how the canes are actually tied in. As long as they get tied in so because they're actually fairly floppy and fairly weak, you'll need to give them some support. They don't need to be brought down into that horizontal position, but there are lots and lots of them. It's incredibly vigorous and very, very fast growing. So throwing up multiple canes from the very base of the plant, so you've got lots and lots to work with, and of course in time you've got lots to actually prune and work on. So for the young and experienced gardener that's new to training climbing roses, St. Swithun is a really, really good one for you to get hold of early on, I say, because it produces lots of canes, very, very vigorous. There's lots of media for you to work with, lots of actual canes for you to tie in and work with as well. This one was actually named after the first bishop who commissioned the commencing and building of Winchester Cathedral, which growing up was very, very close to my hometown where I grew up. So this one is quite special, really. The flowers open from large, I'm going to have to take these out of the vase now, they're a little bit large and unruly for being inside. The flowers open from really, really nice raspberry, very deep pink buds. Excuse me while I sort these out, they're all tangled up. There we go. Right. They are sugar candy pink in colour, very, very highly textured. They've got this lovely raspberry edge to them, almost a little bit of orange across the back of the bud just before it opens, opening to very, very large disc-like flowers, almost 4 inches across, with this lovely cabbage-like chrysanthemum centre. We're going to see roses coming through the collections that are very similar to this. The new introduction, Emma Bridgewater, again has this lovely cabbage-like centre where the central petals, much like Imogen as well, curl back into the centre of the flower. For those of you asking about how quickly a rose is pollinated, roses with this configuration in the centre, where the central stamens are covered by those curling petals, are actually going to last on the plant much longer than an open-formed flower. These really do get in the way of a lot of flying pollinating insects. They actually cloak the pollen and the stamens, so they actually can't get into the centre of the flower and actually pollinate it. So look out if you're interested in flowers that last a long time on the plant. Look out for this cabbage-like centre where those petals curl back in the centre. I say the flowers are around 4 to 4.5 inches across, very, very light, pale pink in colour. Really, really lovely. And a nice quality with this particular one is, I say, this one, if you can imagine this growing on a wall, the flowers are actually held out like little saucers looking out of the plant, very much like if you were growing James Galway or the Pilgrim. This sort of lovely display on the wall, or if you've trained it against the wall, with all the blooms facing outwards towards the light, is really very, very attractive. This one has a really nice myrrh fragrance, which I know some of you are not particularly keen on. Out of 10, this particular rose is going to rate at a 5-star fragrance rating. I say it's myrrh based. It's very, very warm and spicy. Might be a strange thing to say, but it smells of dry clay and earth, which is really quite strange, but it's a really nice woody, warm and very, very heavy fragrance. It's pungent and carries really nicely on the wind. So on a warm day, this really does fill the air with a really pleasant fragrance. A nice change from a lot of the citrus and floral tones. But this one is St. Swithun, a fairly small, medium-sized climber from David Austin Roses, reaching only 8 to 10 feet, so more than manageable. It's vigorous, really disease resistant, easy to handle, virtually thornless, so the perfect climbing rose for the beginner gardener who's not particularly great on actually training plants and wants to have a go. There's lots and lots of vigour in this rose, so you can have lots of matter to work with. I hope you've enjoyed today's review. I will see you all again very soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.